It's that time of year again. It's 2022, which means officially 2021 is cancelled. Good riddance. But I actually think there were some pretty good games that came out last year, and considering that I only basically play horror games for the channel now, I thought I would give you my top 10 horror games of 2021. Now this is my own personal list, these are the games that I enjoyed most this year, and I'm sure there's some games that I missed or didn't play, so feel free to let me know what your favourite horror game was in 2021 down in the comments below. Just a quick couple of rules, these games have to be fully released, so no early access, no part games, which means unfortunately yes, Poppy Playtime isn't on this list. And also, any game studios that copyright struck my videos are also excluded from the list. And yes, I had to exclude one game from the list this year. So, enough rambling, these are my top 10 horror games of 2021. Number 10, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. Now I know I'm going to annoy some people because this is really high on my list, and if I'm going to be honest, it only just barely made it onto my top 10 games of this year. Now for full disclosure, I've never been a big fan of Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay. I've always really enjoyed the story and the lore. I've been a massive fan of MatPat's theories as an example, but I've never enjoyed the gameplay of FNAF. They've always been games that I found very irritating, very frustrating, and honestly, not that mechanically interesting. And so when I saw that Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach was going to be a fully 3D, open sort of game, I was very interested and very excited. And after playing the game, I'm going to be honest, I'm still not a massive fan of Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay. While it's true I did enjoy the game enough for it to be on the list, I did also find the gameplay incredibly frustrating. The game was a buggy mess, I have to be honest, it wasn't ready for release. There were many gameplay parts that felt like they hadn't been tested or felt like they hadn't been tested enough, and I really do think this game was rushed out for a Christmas release. Now before anybody starts complaining, yes I know people were complaining that it had already been delayed once, but people complain about everything. As a game studio, sometimes you have to just ignore the audience and do what's right for your game. And I really do hope that releasing it before Christmas was right for them, but if I'm being entirely honest, the game needed some more time in development for it to be a really good, solid experience at launch, which it wasn't. And I'm personally not the kind of person who is okay with let's fix it later, because you only get to play a game for the first time once, and that first playthrough will always be how you remember the game. But despite all that, the game was still pretty fun. There were some incredibly fun parts of the game, the characters were very interesting, the story was interesting, although it didn't really get interesting until right at the end where you couldn't save, but it did have some really interesting parts, and while I didn't feel the need to make lots of theories, I really could have if I wanted to. There was plenty there that I could have theorized over, but because I didn't enjoy the game as much, I kinda didn't feel the need to. But regardless, being able to pilot Freddy was very interesting in a horror game. The animatronics were cool, they did have their own unique personalities, and each area of the game had its own little unique flares, little special things that made each area a little bit different from the last. And while the gameplay was kind of repetitive, as it is in most horror games to be fair, I can't say that I didn't really enjoy parts of this game, because honestly I did. Using the watch for an example to look out for animatronics while you're hiding somewhere was really cool. And it was cool to see a lot of throwbacks to the older games, even for someone like me who's not an expert on the series. Overall, I think the game was fine, and I think if you're a massive Five Nights at Freddy's fan, you might enjoy this a lot more than I did. But for me, it remains a memorable, if slightly disappointing entry on 2021's game list. Number 9, In Sound Mind. Now full disclosure, this one was a gift. I was gifted this game, but that isn't going to change my opinion of the game at all. In Sound Mind was a very interesting game. It was a very interesting experience more than anything else. The game had a heavy psychological element, which is very common these days in horror games, but this game did something very unique and interesting in the mechanics. Like a lot of horror games, you're sort of dropped into the middle of a story having no clue what's going on. Everything is strange and interesting, and everything just seems a little bit weird. There's something definitely not quite right. And as you explore, you learn little bits of information and the story begins to unfold, again, which is very common in the horror genre. But what's very different about this game is that the story is told to you, but the mechanics feed into that story in very unique and interesting ways. As an example, one of the enemies of the game is a very shy person. She really doesn't like the attention that's brought onto her into the story, and there's a whole story behind this of why she is this way now, but the gameplay feeds into this story. As an example, to defeat this enemy you have to use a mirror, but to use the mirror you can only look behind you. I've never seen a horror game use this mechanic before, but only being able to see a small sliver of this shard and only being able to see behind you makes for a very interesting and very tense gameplay. The game uses a lot of tropes, for example, the whole things move when you're not looking at them, which is very, very common in horror games. I've seen quite a few horror games that use this weeping angel style mechanic, but this game does it in a slightly different way, and while I won't spoil anything, it was a unique and interesting and kind of refreshing take on this, which is basically a trope. Insound Mind wasn't really groundbreaking in any way. It was a very standard, very tropey horror game, but it changes those tropes just enough to be unique and interesting, and very memorable. This is a very memorable game, a game that I probably won't forget anytime soon. And while it wasn't scary, which honestly most horror games these days I don't find to be that scary, it had its moments. It had moments that were tense, it had moments that made me panic, and honestly the story was interesting enough that I didn't mind. Overall, I would say Insound Mind is definitely worth playing for the story alone and for the interesting mechanics, if not necessarily for the horror factor. Either way, I really enjoyed Insound Mind and it was a very nice distraction in 2021. Number 8, 12 minutes. Now, it's debatable whether 12 minutes is a horror game at all. Some people might call it more of a thriller, but for me personally, I absolutely found it a horror game. It's very difficult to explain this game without spoiling it, but I'm going to do my best here. 12 Minutes was a game where the protagonist is stuck in a time loop, and most players, myself included, we think the whole game is about trying to escape from this time loop. But as the story unfolds and develops, which it does very, very slowly, it becomes clear that this isn't a game about winning. In fact, this game is horrible. The story is so dark, really dark in fact, and I know that this game was kind of controversial. Some people really didn't like the gameplay, and some people really didn't like the story. And I can honestly understand both of those takes. Now for me personally, I really enjoyed both of those things. The gameplay was very repetitive. Essentially, you are stuck in a 12-minute time loop, so every 12 minutes, the game resets. Except, the whole point of this is that you now know something new. Every time you go through this loop, you try something different, and every time you try something different, you figure out if that's going to unlock a new pathway, or whether that is going to be the solution. And the whole time you're going through this game, trying to figure out how to break this time loop. And I understand that some people didn't like the repetitive nature of this game, and I understand that this game gave you so many different options that didn't lead anywhere, and that can be frustrating for some people, but I really enjoyed that. The idea that the game gave you so many different things to try, knowing that most of them are going to fail, I thought was really cool, because a lot of games just don't give you those kind of options. But as I got through this game and as the story began to unfold, I began to realize that this game was far more dark than it was originally advertised, and I think that's why some people were possibly caught off guard. This is a real gamble after all. If your game has this sinister dark secret, and I mean really dark secret, if you advertise that, you're going to give it away, but if you don't advertise it, you're going to maybe upset some people who don't like these dark and heavy themes. And I really can understand that this game made some people feel uncomfortable, but for me personally, nothing is off limits. I really enjoy dark horror games. I really enjoy these things that make me feel uncomfortable, and this game 100% made me feel uncomfortable. By the end, I was left feeling dirty and shocked, in a good way though. And not only that, this game has so many secrets, I really could make a theory on it. Add to that, we had some fantastic voice acting, some really well-known actors such as Willem Dafoe, which was fantastic. I really enjoyed 12 Minutes, and I promise you, I spent far more than 12 minutes playing this game last year. Number 7, Chasing Static. Chasing Static didn't seem to be a massive hit. In fact, I don't really know many people that have played it, which is such a shame because this game was really interesting and very unique and kind of a callback to the PlayStation 1 era of horror, which is when I first started playing. It's possible that this game was just sort of nostalgia goggles for me, but I really don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. This game was clearly inspired by the PlayStation 1 era of horror games, and you can see that it has some inspirations from games such as Silent Hill and Resident Evil. More Silent Hill if I'm being honest, but it definitely had that PlayStation 1 era feel to it. It was obviously made to look like a PlayStation 1 game, and it kind of ran like a PlayStation 1 game, although a little bit more advanced since the game did come out last year. But what this game really had to offer was a fantastic story. It wasn't groundbreaking by any means, but I really enjoyed going through this area looking for clues. The unique thing about this game is that you are given this device which can allow you to hear these echoes, and these echoes are kind of ghosts of the past, if you will. While this mechanic didn't get explored as fully as I would have liked, it was very cool to figure out what was going on while you're essentially being haunted by these ghosts. The game was set in a very small Welsh town, and it had a very deep story to it, and I really enjoyed pretty much everything about this game. There was nothing that made me go, ugh, this could have been better, or ugh, this was terrible. The game was just pretty much enjoyable from start to finish. I do think this game is definitely aimed towards an older audience, people that grew up on PlayStation 1 horror games. I don't really think younger players will enjoy this if you've never actually enjoyed the PlayStation 1 era, and I do think that's probably why this game wasn't as popular as it could be. But for people like me, old ones if you will, people who grew up on the PlayStation 1 era, there's something here for you to enjoy. There's a nostalgic feeling and something that brings you back into when games were just good. There was no DLC, there was no extra crap, games were actually released working. I found very few bugs in this game. It just reminded me of when games were fantastic. They didn't look the best compared to today's standards, but they didn't need to. They relied on other things to keep you entertained. And I still think that there's an argument today that graphics aren't everything, and games like this absolutely prove it, that it's still true in today's modern market. You don't need to have the flashiest graphics. You don't need to spend a giant budget making a game look photorealistic or phenomenal. It just has to be fun. And games like Chasing Static are incredibly fun, and I hope we get a few more of those in the coming years. Number 6, the Dark Pictures anthology, House of Ashes. Now, I know the Dark Pictures anthology are not everyone's cup of tea. They suffer from the Telltale problem, that is, the game is very low on action in parts, kind of slow with lots of choices, but your choices don't lead to massively different story outcomes. What I mean by this is that the game begins and ends pretty much the same regardless of what you choose. And that is true in House of Ashes as well. The ending is the ending, just different people will be in different states. So some people might die or live depending on your choices, or things might happen to characters depending on your choices. Now personally, I'm totally okay with this. I really enjoy story-heavy games, and I really enjoy games that even if they give you an illusion of choice, I like that. I was a massive fan of Telltale. And I think that if you were a fan of Telltale, you'll probably be a fan of this series. But again, I understand that some people aren't. But what I will say is that these games that are part of the Dark Pictures anthology are improving over time in my honest opinion. I really do think that House of Ashes is the best one yet, and it seems that the studio are improving with every game, which is good because they've planned 8 games in this anthology. But what's also really apparent is that these games are interconnected, which is a theory that I have, which I'll probably make a video about sometime this year. But it seems like the Dark Pictures anthology games were far more linked than we previously thought. If you've played all 3 of the current games, you're probably starting to think the same thing that I am. So I know that I just said in the last game the graphics aren't everything, and I still stand by that fact. But it has to be said that House of Ashes does look absolutely gorgeous. All of the games in the Dark Pictures anthology look absolutely phenomenal, and this one is no different. It does seem like the studio are tightening up the facial animations though. They've always been a little bit uncanny valley to me, but it seems like they're getting better, but I've always kind of been okay with that. These games just have these amazing stories which, like I say, seem to be becoming more interconnected as time goes on, and I really hope that this trend continues in The Devil in Me. Either way, I've enjoyed all of the Dark Pictures anthology games so far, and I'm very much looking forward to the next one. If this is how the games are going to be every single time, I'll keep buying them until they're all done. I'm a huge fan of this trying to keep everybody alive story, and I'm also a big fan of going back after I've played the game, trying my best to see what happens if you try your worst. These games offer a lot of replayability because you have the ability to go back and make different choices and see how they affect the story. And as I've said, they don't affect the story in massive ways, but these games actually allow the main characters to die. You can probably kill everybody if you really want to. If you really play badly, if you really make the worst decisions, you could probably kill off every character. It is really interesting about these games though, because it's very difficult to know what is the right or wrong choice. In fact, a lot of the choices are very ambiguous, and you don't actually know what the choice is going to lead to until you've made it, and then you might go back and make the opposite choice and you realize that maybe the best choice was the second one. It's very complicated, and it's actually kind of difficult to even make a bad run. If you want to get everybody killed, it can be difficult to make that happen because you might make what you think is a bad choice and it could actually turn out to be a really good choice. Kind of like real life, hey? But I really enjoyed that gameplay. I really enjoyed the panic inducing, I really want this character to live, and I made a bad choice and they died. It can be heartbreaking losing a character knowing that it was all your fault, but I really liked that gameplay, and I'm very much looking forward to the next entry in this series. Number 5, Fatal Frame Maiden of Blackwater. So, I don't actually know if I've ever played a Fatal Frame game. I remember I played something on the PlayStation 2 that was Ghosts with cameras, but I don't know if it was a Fatal Frame game or not. It was so long ago, I honestly can't remember. But I did end up playing Fatal Frame off stream. I played it off stream, offline, completely in my own time. I was planning on making videos on it, But if I'm being honest, after playing the game, I was so confused by the story that I just didn't bother. I didn't bother making any theories because I didn't really have anything interesting to say. But regardless of that, I enjoyed Fatal Frame so much. This game was so cool, and yes, I know it's a remaster, but it's a remaster of a Wii U game, and let's be honest, I'm not one of the 15 people that bought a Wii U, so I feel like it's fine that it's on this list even though it's a remaster, because most people I think will have probably played it now with the Steam version, then probably played it when the Wii U version came out. But I really enjoyed this game. The story was Japanese, so it was, well, Japanese, but it was very crazy. I really didn't have much of a clue what was going on for most of the game, but I still enjoyed it regardless. It was like watching an anime halfway through when you have no idea what's going on. You're probably still going to enjoy it though. The gameplay was also super interesting. This game definitely felt like a survival horror game. It reminded me of old Resident Evil or Onimusha, these games where you had limited resources and you had to try and manage your resources as much as your enemies. And this game had the really unique mechanic of using a camera to defeat the enemies, which was really cool. The idea that you had to sort of take photographs to defeat the enemies, which meant you couldn't hide from them, you couldn't run from them, you had to face them dead on. And again, this game wasn't the scariest. It had its moments, it had parts that were a little bit creepy, but it was the atmosphere of the game, it was the storyline. The storyline was very heavy in a lot of ways, and it added to this sort of oppressive nature of this mountain. The entire game takes place on this, what is essentially a cursed mountain, and you are seeing these echoes of the past. You are seeing the story of what led to this mountain being so cursed. And kind of like a lot of Japanese horrors, you know, you always have these creepy women with long black hair and they always seem to come out of water and come out of televisions and stuff. It was kind of tropey at this point, but it was so cool to be inside this mystery and trying to be figuring it out. You're part of a team of people who are essentially trying to figure out the mystery, and I really enjoyed it from start to finish. It was a very long game. It took me quite a few days to finish it, but I never ever felt bored. I was continuously going through these areas, looking for secrets and clues, looking for more hints to the story, and even though the game did backtrack through these areas several times, you played as several different characters, and you'd be going through the area as one character, and then a couple of levels later, you'd be going back through the exact same area as a different character, but things may have changed, and it progressively got more dark and more spooky as the game carried on, and I can't say there was a single part where I went, I don't like this. It was just fun from start to finish. And even though I thought a couple of sections were a little tricky, a little difficult, I did die a couple of times that I thought was a bit unfair, I still really enjoyed Fatal Frame, and honestly, I'd be happy to play another game if they ever make a new one. Number 4, Happy's Humble Burger Farm. This game was such a surprise hit to me. I'd never heard of Scythe dev team before this game, and I didn't know that this game was part of a shared universe. There are multiple games that are all set in this same universe, and I had no clue until I stumbled across this game on Steam. If you look at this game from a surface level, it just looks like any typical horror game with a twist. It looks like just a standard horror game that also seems to have some cooking simulator elements, and that's kind of true, but there's so much more to the game than that. This game has a very deep conspiracy element to it, and if I'm being entirely honest, I don't know if the game is in support of conspiracy theories or is satirical of conspiracy theories, and honestly, I don't care. It was interesting enough. This entire game is a mystery under a conspiracy, under a mystery, under another conspiracy. Everything is about people being brainwashed or controlled or lied to. There's always a deeper mystery to solve, and the game has a lot, and I mean a lot, of television material in it. I actually sat and watched the in-game television for over an hour, and I was continuously seeing new things, and yes, it repeated some of the same programs, but I was continuously learning new stuff. The game was so interesting that I actually sat for over an hour watching a television. I was sat still, not even playing the game, just watching the television, just entranced by how creepy it was and how odd and how it sort of related to our own world in a way. There was definitely a message here, even if I'm not entirely sure what that message was. But similar to Chasing Static, this game definitely has inspirations from the PlayStation 1 era. You really do feel like this is a game from the past, even though it was made last year. And again, I really like that. This game just felt like a nod to my childhood, back to when games were just games. They were good, they were finished, they were complete. And again, I saw very, very few bugs in this game. I think maybe one, if at all any. Regardless, this game was so cool. It felt like BioShock in a lot of ways. It had that sort of story that you have no idea what's going on, and as it unfolds by the end of the game, once you actually realize what was going on, it just makes you want to go back and play it again and look for all the clues that you missed the first time. And yes, I think this game potentially has Character of the Year. Maybe I should do an awards show. Well, that's a good idea. But this potentially had Character of the Year, and yes, I'm talking about Toe. Honestly, I highly recommend this game if you don't mind going digging for clues. If you like the mystery, if you like the intrigue, if you have some spare time and you want to go digging for a game, this is definitely a game that has more to it than you first think. And I do think that even though the cooking simulator element is in there, it's really not the main focus of the game for me. Once you finish the game, you actually unlock the endless mode, and you can just keep flipping burgers if you want. And I actually found this mechanic really fun. The kitchen burger flipping mechanic was really fun, but it was only one element of the game. So this game has a lot to offer. I highly recommend it, and I highly enjoyed it. I cannot wait to see what the Scythe dev team come up with next. Number 3, Resident Evil Village. What do I really need to say about Resident Evil Village at this point? In fact, let's talk about Resident Evil Village for a moment, because I really enjoyed Resident Evil Village. I loved Resident Evil Village. I think Resident Evil Village is a phenomenal game. I mean, really good. I really loved Resident Evil Village. I also think it's a pretty crap Resident Evil game though. Yeah, I know, that kind of seems weird, doesn't it? That I really loved it, but I don't think it's a great Resident Evil game. So for me, I've been playing Resident Evil back since Resident Evil 1 on the PlayStation 1. I have a lot of history with the Resident Evil series, and if I had to pick my all-time favorite series of horror, it probably would be Resident Evil. And so for me, I have a very heavily invested interest in this series, and I'm a huge fan of the survival horror, the oppressive environments, this umbrella tyrannical corporation that's present through most of the games, this, conspiracy, the characters. I really love most things about Resident Evil. But this game is missing one of those things. It's missing that oppressive horror atmosphere. And while there were parts of the game that did really try to steer into the horror, in fact, one criticism of this game is that it tried to do a little bit of everything, which I personally would rather the game just pick one avenue and go down that. This game clearly went down the action horror route. I still think that there was a lot to love in Resident Evil Village. The characters were fantastic, even if some of them didn't stick around for long enough, especially after how much marketing they got. But the characters were fantastic. Each area felt unique and different and had its own little flair, and none of them were bad. I didn't personally find any of them bad, even though the factory area was my least favorite. It was still not terrible. But the locations were varied, the enemies were cool, they were a little bit more interesting than the molded from Resident Evil 7 in my honest opinion. And while, like I say, I don't think this was the best Resident Evil game, it was clearly inspired by Resident Evil 4, which is one of my least favorites. It is also one of the most fan favorites, so I can't be selfish. I can't have every Resident Evil game be tailored for me, because some people love Resident Evil 4. A lot of people, it's their favorite Resident Evil. For a lot of people, it was the first one that they played, and I'm sure a lot of people enjoyed this style of Resident Evil much more than I did, because that's the Resident Evil that they love. But for me, I much prefer the older Resident Evils. I much prefer the more horror, atmospheric type of Resident Evil, but I still really enjoyed Resident Evil Village. If this is all we're ever going to get from Resident Evil, I would still buy them, I would still enjoy them. I just really hope we get some more of the old style ones too. I really don't think we can't have both, considering that Resident Evil 2 sold incredibly well, and that one was far more on the horror end of the spectrum, whereas Village was far more on the action end of the spectrum. I really think there is a market for both, and I think that for me personally, I enjoy both, and so I'm okay with it. I'm okay with Village. I'll be happy to see the next one in the series, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the story goes from here. And of course, yes, Tall Vampire Lady. Number 2. Inscription. What do I say about this game? I just finished it. We streamed it over on YouTube a couple of weeks ago, and this game blew my mind. It's very rare that a game completely blows my mind like this game did, and I think one of the reasons was that it wasn't like anything I was expecting. The game looked like it was just a card game with a horror element to it, but that's really not what this game was. This game, without any spoilers, this game was a very deep Undertale-like experience. There was a story, and then there was a sub-story, and the sub-story was the really interesting one. This is the story that you need to go a little bit digging for. This is the story that unfolds over time, and this is the story that is very ambiguous and confusing. It's a story that I really want to go back and dig. I might actually go back and dig through this game and start to formulate an opinion and a theory, because there was so many little hints, and a lot of them seemed very, very dark to me, and I love that. That's my favorite thing about these style of games, is when they go dark and they have these dark hidden secrets. There's a reason why some of my previous videos have been the hidden dark secrets of X, because I'm a huge fan of that kind of thing. And Inscription had that. It had the story. It had a whole ARG set up for it. It had this whole outside story. It had the hidden dark secrets. It had a really fun gameplay in the card game. The card game was actually really, really fun, which I'm glad, because it was a big part of this game. But it had this conspiracy, this mystery, and it had so many little intriguing plot threads, and a lot of them were very confusing, and I'm still not entirely sure what happened, but it didn't matter. They were memorable, they were unique. The characters were also very memorable and unique, and honestly, I don't know what else to say. If you like that kind of mystery and you don't mind a card game, absolutely go and play this one. I loved it so much, I streamed it, and then I had to stream it 2 more days to get it finished. So I ended up streaming 3 days in a row, which is very, very rare for me. I don't stream that much anymore, but I had to because I was just so invested. I was gripped from start to finish. The minute the story began to open up, I was gripped. It had me. I was just so invested into what was going on that I had to keep playing. And it's so rare for me. In 2021, 2022, it's so rare that I can't put a game down. I'm not as excited about games as I used to be. I have to be honest, I just don't get as hyped. I don't get as excited, and that's a shame. Maybe I'm just becoming older, or maybe the game industry and all its crap is just becoming less exciting. I don't know, but whatever it is, I don't generally get as addicted to games like I used to, and this game reminded me why I love video games so much. This game, and I'm not exaggerating, it really did. This game reminded me that video games can give you something that no other entertainment medium can give. I've never watched a movie and had to watch it straight away again. Well, that's a lie. Okay, 300 was amazing. But it's very rare when you watch a movie to feel so like desperate to watch it again. But with video games like Inscription, I'm still thinking about it weeks later. It has its teeth in me. I was so addicted and gripped and invested. I don't know what other words to say. I really don't. I don't know other words to describe the feeling that Inscription gave to me, which was just one of what I used to get at video games. Excited. And I loved it. I loved everything about Inscription. I really did. And I'm kind of sad that I didn't play it at launch, because I'm sure I could have made more videos about it. But honestly, it's one of those games that you'll remember. You'll remember for a long, long time. And I think that those kind of games are very special. And this game is an indie game. It's a very small studio from what I've heard. And it also ties into games that I have played. I played a bit of Pony Island, and now I just want to go back and finish that, because, you know, knowing that it's all interconnected is part of this whole like universe or world. I just need to know everything. I need to know everything about it. And so yeah, Inscription, amazing game. Go play it if you haven't already. No spoilers. Absolutely phenomenal game, and it very nearly was my #1 game of the year. But my #1 game of the year is probably no surprise to most of you if you've been around the channel for a while, and that one is coming up now. What can I say about Little Nightmares 2? Am I biased? Yes, absolutely. Do I care? No, it's my list. Little Nightmares is by far one of my favorite series of all time, and I adore it. I adore everything about Little Nightmares. This is why I've made so many Little Nightmares 2 videos on the channel, because I just love this series so much. But if I'm being honest, I was a little bit apprehensive about Little Nightmares 2. Yes, I was very excited. After Little Nightmares 1, I was very excited to see what was going to happen. But I was a little bit apprehensive because Little Nightmares 1 was so good, I was kind of worried that they wouldn't be able to keep that up. I was kind of worried that they wouldn't be able to top it. And I'm pleased to say that Little Nightmares 2 was just as good as Little Nightmares 1. And I don't necessarily think that I prefer Little Nightmares 2. I still think that I prefer Little Nightmares 1. Little Nightmares 2 was so good that I don't care. Little Nightmares is a series that makes no sense whatsoever. There is a story and a message that is shown to you. Nothing is told to you. This is one of the biggest rules of storytelling. As much as possible, you should show, not tell. And this game takes that to heart. This entire series takes that to heart. It tells you absolutely nothing, but it shows you everything. And for a theorist like myself, this is a dream come true because you could theorize about Little Nightmares till the cows come home. You could theorize until the end of time. And in fact, Little Nightmares 2 was the game that started my theorizing journey. It was an accident. It wasn't intended. I was at the time making Dead by Daylight content and I saw that Little Nightmares 2 was coming out and I played it and I loved it and I just made a theory for fun. And that video propelled my channel. We went from 5,000 subscribers to over 50,000 subscribers. It was the first time my channel you could deem successful, and yes, that leads to an element of bias. I love this game for more reasons than I just love the game. I have a connection to it that few other games are ever going to have. But even aside from that, this is a series that I can't stop thinking about. Little Nightmares 1 and 2, every week I think of something new or a new idea, or I remember something about that series and think that could be an interesting idea. And honestly, for a game that came out almost a year ago, for me to still be thinking about it is just a phenomenal achievement. Now, the gameplay was pretty much exactly the same as the first game. They added a couple of new minor mechanics in like the weapons, but essentially the gameplay was pretty much the same. It's minor platforming with mainly hiding from some enemies and running from other ones, and that's okay. That's okay. That's not what the game is about. The game is about the world and the story within that world. And again, I say story very loosely because who knows what's going on with Little Nightmares 2? Who knows? Nobody knows. Really, nobody knows what's going on. We have our own best guesses, and everyone has their own headcanon and everyone has their own, take on it. And everybody's is pretty much as valid as everybody else's because we really don't know. But the game also manages to tackle real world issues in hunger and in poverty and in greed and corporate greed and all of these things that are real world problems. The game manages to make really bold statements about them with no dialogue, with no, text or preaching or anything like that. It just shows us our own humanity, and it shows us the flaws in humanity. It shows us the darker side of humanity in this world, which is a parody or a mirror of our own, and a dark mirror, a black mirror, if you will. And it does it in such a way that is just beautiful and is scary all at the same time. It is like a bad mushroom trip, and I've made that comparison in previous theories. It really is a universe worth exploring. If you like horror in this capacity, if you like the weird and the wonderful but still dark, this series is incredibly dark, then there's something to love about Little Nightmares. And I've said it before, I'm begging for DLC. I am begging for a Little Nightmares 3. At this point, I don't care. I don't care. Give me a comic. Give me something. I'm desperate for it. And again, it's rare for me to have that feeling about video games anymore. I don't get as invested as I used to. And honestly, I will buy anything. Just give me something. The fans want it. And I think hopefully we'll get some more content. But Little Nightmares 2 was a phenomenal experience. The music was beautiful. It was perfectly matched to the game and to the atmosphere. The gameplay was just as fun as the first one. The characters and the story had just as many twists and turns and things to theorize about. There's nothing bad I can say about Little Nightmares 2. I love it. I will always love it. It will be a piece of my gaming history for as long as I keep playing video games. And I think this is a perfect number one for 2021. So there we go. Those are my top 10 games of 2021. I know this video was a little bit rambly, and if you are still here right at the end of this very long video, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much. I hope you did enjoy this video, because honestly, 2021 was a brilliant year for me as my career, as my YouTube channel. It was phenomenal. I really am super grateful to all of you. And these games, you know, many of these games on this list sort of helped me get there. And it's been such a pleasure to be able to play them and make theories about them and make videos about them and actually be able to, you know, have people hear my opinions. It's just wonderful. So thank you so much. Again, I'm not even going to ask for likes and all that crap today. I just really enjoyed making this video. So thank you so much for watching. And I cannot wait to see what we get in 2022.